The last message from Viridia was not a scream, but a song. It arrived at Sector Command laced with the scent of ozone and shattered hope, a fragmented data burst that the comms technicians initially mistook for cosmic background noise. But Elias Thorne knew better. He had spent a decade weaving the dream of Viridia into existence, and he knew its voice. The colony, his grand experiment in interspecies harmony, was a joint venture between the Terran Confederacy and the Sylvans, a race of silicon-based flora that communicated through resonant light and harmonic frequencies. Their songs were the lifeblood of the terraformed moon, a constant digital symphony that hummed in the very soil. This final transmission was a broken chord, a single, terrified note held until it dissolved into the static of the void. Elias stood on the observation deck of the diplomatic hub orbiting Mars, the red dust of the planet a stark contrast to the vibrant green he held in his mind's eye. Viridia was his life's work, the crown jewel of the Outer Rim Reconciliation Commission he directed. It was meant to be a symbol, a testament to the belief that not every frontier had to be forged in blood and fear. On Viridia, human children learned to tend sylvan light groves, and sylvan spore sages learned the chaotic beauty of human poetry. It was peace made manifest, a fragile garden blooming in the unforgiving wilderness of space. For 3 days, the official explanation was a coronal mass ejection, a freak solar event disrupting communications across the Cinderfall Nebula. Elias played the part of the calm administrator, issuing reassuring statements to a worried Confederacy, while a cold knot of dread tightened in his gut. He knew the sons of that system. They were old and placid. This was no act of nature. He authorized the launch of the Stargazer, a deep-range stealth probe, diverting it from its classified espionage mission with a series of codes he was not technically supposed to possess. He needed to see. The admirals protested. The senators grumbled about protocol. But Elias Thorne, the man who had built a career on soft words and patient compromise, held his ground with a firmness that surprised them all. He had a right to know if his dream was dying. The images from the Stargazer arrived on the 5th day, and they did not show death. They showed something infinitely worse. The probe's telescope, capable of reading the signature on a soldier's helmet from a light minute away, relayed a vision of impossible beauty and horror. Viridia was no longer green. The entire moon glittered, a perfect, multifaceted crystal sphere catching the light of its distant sun. The sprawling biodomes, the winding river valleys, the sky-piercing sylvan spore towers, all of it was frozen, transmuted into a single, seamless sculpture of shimmering, translucent material. The probe's spectrograph analysis was chillingly concise. Crystalline silicate transmutation, biosigns present, but static. Zero kinetic energy, zero thermal variance. 173,000 human and sylvan life forms were still there, not dead, but petrified in the midst of their lives. A mother reaching for her child, a farmer tending his fields, a sylvan sage in mid-song, its light petals unfurled in a gesture of creation. They were all preserved, transformed into eternal, silent statues. As the Confederacy's high command reeled from the data, a broadcast signature bloomed from the edge of the Viridian system. It was a fleet, but not one they recognized from any military database. The ships were elegant, like shards of obsidian sculpted by a master artist, gliding through the void with an unnatural grace. They broadcasted on all Terran frequencies, a single, repeating message that was less a declaration of war and more a critique of an art exhibit. The voice was melodic, genderless, speaking perfect Terran with an air of detached superiority. The canvas was flawed, its colors were chaotic, its composition illogical. We have offered it permanence. We have given it form. Witness the art of the lumen. It is a gift. That was all. The lumen, a species so reclusive and ancient they were considered mythological, had announced themselves not with threats or demands, but with an act of cosmic vandalism that was also an act of mass murder. The emergency session in the War Council chambers beneath Olympus Mons was a storm of fear and impotent rage. The Lumen were an elder race, their technology bordering on magic. They didn't use plasma cannons or kinetic strikes. They wielded forces that bent the laws of physics. To fight them would be like a tribe of spear wielders declaring war on a hurricane. The consensus was swift and cowardly condemnation. Sanctions. A blockade they had no real way of enforcing. They would mourn Viridia as a tragic, inexplicable loss and pray the Lumen never came closer to the core worlds. Elias sat in the back of the chamber, a ghost in his own life, listening to the politicians and generals debate the appropriate level of diplomatic outrage. They spoke of the incident, the Viridian event, carefully avoiding words like slaughter or atrocity. They displayed holographic charts of economic impact and potential refugee flows, but they would not show the images from the Stargazer. They would not show the Crystal Mother forever reaching for her frozen child. That night, Elias used his clearance to enter the archives, the digital catacombs where the Confederacy buried its darkest secrets. He wasn't looking for a weapon. He was looking for an answer, for some precedent, some forgotten history that could explain this level of casual, artistic cruelty. What he found was not an answer, but a question. It was a program file so old it predated the Confederacy itself, from the frantic, paranoid era of humanity's first interstellar expansion. It was codenamed Project Requiem. It wasn't a weapon system in the traditional sense. It was theoretical physics weaponized in the most terrifying way imaginable. Chrono ordnance. Devices that didn't explode, but erased. A chrono torpedo wouldn't detonate on a ship's hull. It would create a localized, paradoxical temporal field, excising its target from the timeline. The ship wouldn't be destroyed. It would have never existed. The crew would not die. They would have never been born. The technology was deemed an abomination, a sin against the fabric of reality itself, its use risking unpredictable causal blowback that could unravel entire star systems. The project was terminated, its research sealed, its prototypes scuttled, and its very existence stricken from all but the deepest, most encrypted archives. But they hadn't scuttled all of them. One deployment platform remained, a single, skeletal warship hidden in the gravity well of a collapsed star, manned by a crew of silent, cybernetically interfaced servitors. The ship was called the Unmaker, and its command codes were locked behind a philosophical failsafe. They required the unanimous, simultaneous authorization of the Confederacy's three highest authorities, the Lord Admiral, the Senate Premier, and the Director of the Reconciliation Commission, a soldier, a politician, and a peacemaker, a triumvirate designed to never agree, ensuring the weapon would never be used. Elias Thorne was the peacemaker. He stared at the security protocol on his screen, his own title glowing in amber light. He looked at the access port that requested his biometric and psycho-emotional signature. He thought of his wife, Lena, an exobotanist who had chosen to stay on Viridia to study the Sylvan symbiosis. He thought of his daughter, Maya, who would have been 7 years old. Her last message to him, a shaky vid of her holding up a glowing sylvan bloom. Her laughter echoing a joy that no longer existed in the universe. The peacemaker inside him had died 5 days ago. A new man was being born in the cold silence of the archives. A man forged from grief and whispering. Blasphemous knowledge. He didn't hesitate. He pressed his hand to the scanner. The system recognized him, the lock turning from amber to green. One of 3. The Lord Admiral was a pragmatist who would never risk a war he couldn't win. The Premier was a politician who would never risk his career on a monstrous gamble. They would never agree. Elias knew he couldn't persuade them, so he wouldn't ask. Using the override authorities granted to his office for dire diplomatic emergencies, a loophole no one ever thought would be used for this, he began to rewrite the command protocol. He wasn't a soldier or a hacker, but he was meticulous, patient, and driven by a fury so cold and absolute it gave him perfect clarity. He peeled back layers of security, rerouted authorization nodes, and created a phantom command signal that mimicked the signatures of the Admiral and the Premier. It was an act of high treason, the gravest crime in the Confederacy's charter, but the concept of law felt like a distant, childish thing to him now. The Lumen had shown him that the only law in the universe was the will to impose your reality upon others. His work was interrupted by a chime, a priority call from General Eva Rostova, the iron-willed commander of the 3rd Frontier Fleet. She was a hawk, a relic from a more brutal era, constantly clashing with Elias's diplomatic initiatives. Her message was short, encrypted. Thorn. The council is burying them. I won't stand for it. My nephew was a teacher in the Central Dome. They're calling it a tragedy. Tragedy is when a reactor overloads. This was a desecration. I know about Requiem. I know what it takes to unlock it. If you have the will, I have the ships to deliver it. Elias looked from Rostova's grim, determined face on his screen to the glowing command prompt before him. He had found his soldier. He didn't need to fool the Lord Admiral after all. He finished his work, the phantom code for the Premier slotting into place, and then forwarded the final authorization key to General Rostova's flagship. His part, the Peacemaker's part, was already done. The system chimed once more. A soft final note. Authorization accepted. Failsafe disengaged. Project Requiem is now active. The Unmaker was awake. Elias Thorne, the man who had built gardens, now stood alone in the dark, his face illuminated by the cold light of the screen. He had just sentenced a species to non-existence. The Lumen called the crystallization of Viridia art. He had decided it was time to erase the artist. The awakening of the Unmaker was not an event of sound or light, but of absence. In the Black Maw, a gravitational graveyard where the Confederacy had hidden its most terrible secret, the collapsed star at its center suddenly seemed to dim. It was an illusion, a trick of warped space-time. The ship, dormant for a century, did not power up. It unfolded itself from the fabric of the void, its skeletal frame, a latticework of dark matter conduits and temporal sinks, absorbed the faint starlight around it, creating a perfect sphere of absolute blackness against the cosmos. There were no engine flares, no running lights, only a chilling sense of subtraction. It was a hole in reality, a void that had taken the shape of a warship. On its bridge, the echoes stirred. They were not a crew in any human sense. They were the last vestiges of Project Requiem's creators, their neural patterns digitally embalmed and slaved to the ship's core logic. Their physical forms were minimalist humanoid chassis of polished chrome, their faces smooth, featureless mirrors that reflected the cold, dead instruments around them. They moved with a silent, synchronized grace, their actions not dictated by orders but by the fulfillment of a century-old command protocol that had, at last, been satisfied. They made no sound as they brought the chrono-ordnance silos to a state of readiness, their mirrored faces showing only the dispassionate glow of the activated systems. Elias Thorne felt the ship's awakening as a tremor in his soul. He was in a secure sub-level of the diplomatic hub, the silent hum of the station's life support, a stark contrast to the screaming void he had just unleashed. He had not slept. His eyes were fixed on a small, framed hologram on his desk, Lena and Maya on Viridia, bathed in the soft, harmonic light of a sylvan grove. He did not feel sorrow when he looked at it now. He felt a profound, clarifying calm, the placid certainty of an avalanche that knows its path down the mountain. The chime was soft, a ghost in the room. It was Rostova. The ghost is awake. Her voice was a low gravel, devoid of triumph. The Lord Admiral is scrambling the 1st and 5th Fleets. The Premier has branded you a traitor. They'll be at your door in less than an hour. A diplomatic shuttle is waiting for you in Bay 7. It's clean. No transponder. It will take you to my flagship. Elias didn't reply. He simply picked up the hologram, its light flickering for a moment before he deactivated it, plunging the image of his family into darkness. He placed the cold, dead frame into his pocket and walked out of the office where he had spent a decade building peace, not looking back. The journey to Rostova's fleet was a blur of calculated risks and cold professionalism. The shuttle pilot, a grim-faced woman with the 3rd Fleet's insignia tattooed on her neck, navigated the congested Martian orbits with a nerveless precision, her ship a silent shadow among lumbering freighters and flashy corporate yachts. They docked with Rostova's flagship, the Iron Resolve, a battle-scarred dreadnought that looked less like a vessel and more like a floating fortress. The air on the bridge was thick with the smell of recycled ozone and the low thrum of a warship on high alert. Rostova stood before the main view screen, her arms crossed, her posture as unyielding as the ship's armored hull. "Thorne," she said, not turning. "You look like hell." "I feel appropriate to the occasion," Elias replied, his voice flat. He stepped beside her, looking out at the starfield. The Council's response was predictable. Predictable and irrelevant. Rostova countered, "They can call us traitors, but they can't stop us." "Not yet. We have a 30-minute head start before they can lock down the slip lanes. We are heading for the Black Maw now." She finally turned to face him, her eyes like chips of granite. "I need to know. Was this the only way? Are you certain?" It was the last flicker of the soldier questioning the abyss. A final check before the plunge. Elias met her gaze. And, for a moment, the Peacemaker and the Hawk saw the same ghost in each other's eyes. The ghost of a family member turned to Crystal. "They didn't kill them, General," Elias said, his voice barely a whisper. "They curated them. They turned my daughter into a statue in a gallery of horrors. There is no diplomatic solution for that. There is only a response." Rostova nodded slowly, the flicker in her eyes extinguished, replaced by the hard gleam of resolve. "Then let's make sure our response is understood. The rendezvous with the Unmaker was a descent into a nightmare. As the Iron Resolve approached, proximity alerts screamed on the bridge. The ship wasn't just absorbing light, it was warping the space around it. Navigational computers struggled to plot a stable course as the laws of physics grew frayed and unreliable at its edge. It was a vessel that actively rejected the universe it inhabited. Elias and Rostova took a heavily shielded shuttle, flying into the sphere of blackness. The moment they crossed the threshold, all sound ceased. The shuttle's engines were still running, but their roar was swallowed by a profound, oppressive silence. Before them, the Unmaker hung in the void, its frame a non-Euclidean tangle of impossible angles and dark, humming energy. They docked in a cavernous, sterile hangar bay. The air was cold, still, and carried the faint, metallic scent of centuries. As the ramp lowered, 3 of the Echoes glided forward to meet them. They moved in perfect unison, their mirrored faces reflecting the 2 humans, distorting their features into alien masks. One of them extended a hand, palm up, not in greeting, but in request. Elias understood. He stepped forward and placed his hand in its cold, metallic grip. A flicker of blue light traveled up the Echo's arm. It tilted its head, a gesture that was unnervingly organic. On the bridge of the Unmaker, a single word flashed on the main console in archaic Terran script: Commander. The failsafe was broken. The ship was his. The bridge was a cathedral of silence. There were no chairs, no comfortable stations, only a circular platform in the center surrounded by a panoramic view of the void outside. The Echoes stood at the perimeter, their bodies motionless, their mirrored faces turned towards Elias. He was the conscious mind. They were the nervous system. Status of the primary ordnance. Elias spoke, his voice sounding thin and alien in the dead air. An Echo to his left turned its head. A schematic appeared in the air before Elias, a 3-dimensional rendering of the chrono torpedoes. They didn't look like weapons. They were gyroscopic spheres of interlocking rings, spinning silently around a core of pure, contained paradox. 6 munitions, Rostova breathed, her military mind assessing the impossible arsenal. 6 shots to erase 6 targets from time. We only need 1, Elias said, turning his attention to the star charts that now filled the space around him. But we need to know where to fire it. The Lumen fleet vanished after broadcasting their message. They could be anywhere in the galaxy. Rostova moved to a tactical display projected by one of the Echoes. My fleet can begin casting a sensor net. We can send probes through every known slip lane in this sector. It will take time. But we don't have time. Elias interrupted. He walked closer to the main display, his mind racing. He was not a strategist, but he was a diplomat. He understood communication, nuance, and the fatal flaw of all beings who believe themselves to be gods: arrogance. They called their work art. They signed their peace. That broadcast wasn't just a message. It was a boast. It was meant to be seen, to be heard, to be marveled at. He turned to an Echo. Analyze the original Lumen broadcast. Ignore the audio-visual data. Scan for subquantum signatures, entangled particles, residual chronometric frequencies. Anything that would serve as a trace. They wouldn't hide their trail. An artist wants their gallery to be found. The Echo tilted its head. For a full minute, nothing happened. Rostova began to pace, impatient. Then, The star chart collapsed, replaced by a complex, shimmering thread of light, a spider silk of impossible physics, stretching from the Viridian system out into the uncharted void of the galactic halo. It was a path, woven from the very arrogance Elias had predicted. The lumen hadn't covered their tracks. They had left a shimmering, quantum breadcrumb trail, confident that no lesser species would ever have the means to follow it. At the end of the trail, a single point of light pulsed with a slow, arrogant rhythm. "There," Elias said, his voice a cold, sharp point in the silence. Rostova stared at the coordinates. "That's outside the mapped galaxy, the stellar abyss. There's nothing out there." "There is now," Elias countered. He looked at the mirrored face of the echo before him, seeing his own distorted reflection, a man he no longer recognized. The peacemaker was a ghost, a memory. In his place stood the Unmaker, a priority channel, patched through from Rostova's flagship, suddenly crackled into existence, a violation of the bridge's sanctified silence. It was the frantic voice of her second-in-command. "General Lord Admiral Cortez is on an open channel. He's declared us a rogue state. He's demanding our immediate surrender. He says Director Thorne is to be executed for crimes against reality." Elias looked at Rostova. Her face was set like stone. She gave a single sharp shake of her head. There was no going back. "Echo," Elias commanded, his voice ringing with an authority he had never known he possessed. "Plot a course. Engage the temporal drive." The ship did not shudder or roar to life. The view outside the bridge did not streak into lines of light. Instead, the stars folded. Reality itself seemed to peel back, the fabric of space-time bunching up like a pulled thread in a tapestry. The Unmaker did not travel through space. It excised the distance between 2 points, stitching its departure and arrival together in a seamless, instantaneous violation of causality. Elias Thorne stood on the bridge of his ghost ship, his hand resting on the cold console, the hologram of his family a dead weight in his pocket. He was a traitor, a fugitive, and the commander of a doomsday weapon. He was no longer going to war. He was going to edit the universe. The exit from the temporal drive was not an arrival, but a revelation. One moment, the bridge of the Unmaker was a cocoon of absolute non-space. The next, it was suspended before a canvas of impossible grandeur. They had reached the stellar abyss, and the lumen had made it their personal gallery. Before them lay the prism, a constructed celestial orrery on a scale that defied comprehension. It was a pocket of curated reality where physics had been made to kneel before aesthetics. Captured stars, no larger than marbles from this distance, burned in perfect, geometric orbits around a central, pulsating heart of pure, white energy. Nebulae had been sculpted into vast, silent tapestries of glowing gas depicting scenes of cosmic birth and death. Crystalline planets, faceted like diamonds, spun in hypnotic, interlocking patterns, their surfaces glittering with structures that were both cities and sculptures. It was the most beautiful thing Elias Thorne had ever seen, and it was built from the same casual omnipotence that had turned his world into a tomb. Rostova let out a breath she seemed to have been holding since they left Mars. "Gods," she whispered, the word a curse, not a prayer. "They build with stars." Her fleet, the half-dozen cruisers and destroyers of the Third, emerged from slipspace behind the Unmaker, their rugged, functional designs looking brutish and crude against the sublime artistry of the prism. They were a smear of charcoal on a masterpiece. The lumen were not blind. Almost immediately, a response came, not as a hail or a warning, but as a subtle shift in the composition before them. One of the crystalline planets detached from its perfect orbit and glided towards the Terran fleet with an unhurried, deliberate grace. As it drew closer, its surface shimmered, and a voice washed over their comms, a melodic, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in the very hull of the ships. "A flaw," the voice sang, a note of detached curiosity in its tone. "A pocket of dissonance has appeared on the canvas, unplanned, illogical. Its form is a void, an absence of art. It must be corrected." There was no malice, no anger. It was the voice of a master artist noticing a smudge of dirt on their work and preparing to wipe it clean. Elias felt a cold fury, pure and sharp as a shard of glass, cut through the last vestiges of his grief. They didn't see a threat. They saw an imperfection. "General," he said, his voice echoing in the dead air of the bridge, "they're not going to fight us. They're going to erase us." Rostova's voice crackled through the shuttle's internal comm, a lifeline of gritty reality in this place of impossible beauty. "All ships form defensive pattern Epsilon. Target the approaching celestial. Full kinetic and plasma spreads on my mark." On the view screen, her ships began to maneuver, their engines flaring like angry sparks. The approaching crystal world continued its serene advance, unconcerned. Mark Rostova commanded. A storm of plasma bolts and railgun slugs erupted from the Terran fleet, a barrage that could have slagged a planetary defense grid. The projectiles streaked across the void and impacted the crystalline surface. There was no explosion, no cratering the moment they touched the planet. They were simply absorbed, their kinetic and thermal energy transmuting into a soft, internal pulse of light that rippled across its faceted surface. The planet glowed a little brighter for a moment, as if it had just consumed a satisfying meal. Correction is an act of aesthetic refinement. The lumen voice hummed, its tone unchanged. Then, from the glowing surface of the planet, a wave of shimmering energy expanded outwards. It was not a weapons blast. It was a slow, beautiful wave of pearlescent light, like an aurora borealis untethered from a world. One of Rostova's destroyers, the Stalwart, was the first to be touched by the wave. Its captain screamed a single clipped syllable of warning before the comm went dead. Elias and Rostova watched in horrified silence as the ship was transformed. Its gray, armored hull began to shimmer, its hard lines softening. Metal flowed like wax, reforming into elegant, impossible spires. The engine flare crystallized into a static, multi-hued plume of frozen light. In seconds, the warship was no longer a warship. It was a sculpture, a beautiful, silent ornament of crystal and trapped light, now drifting placidly as it was gently nudged into a new, more aesthetically pleasing orbit within the prism. The lumen had not destroyed the Stalwart. They had corrected it. Rostova's hands clenched into fists. "All remaining ships," she ordered, her voice dangerously calm, "fall back behind the Unmaker. Provide targeting telemetry. Do not engage directly. Buy us time." Elias turned from the horrifyingly beautiful sight of the corrected destroyer to the Echo standing before him. Its mirrored face showed only his own grim reflection. "They are the target," Elias said, the words feeling heavy, final. the source of the broadcast, the consciousness that guides this place. The echo tilted its head. The star chart of the prism reappeared, and a single point, the pulsating white heart at the orrery's center, began to glow. Conceptual target, the Lumen Collective. Origin point. The ship understood. It wasn't just targeting a location, it was targeting a species, an idea. Prepare primary ordnance, Elias commanded. The schematic of a chrono torpedo appeared before him, its interlocking rings beginning to spin faster, the paradoxical core within it glowing with a light that was the color of non-existence. The process was not instantaneous. The weapon needed to be calibrated to the specific temporal frequency of its target. It had to learn what it was going to erase before it could perform the act. The echoes began to move. Their silent, balletic motions focused on shimmering consoles of light. The Unmaker was tasting time, sampling the history of the lumen, preparing its singular, terrible response. Outside, the battle, if it could be called that, was turning into a massacre of aesthetics. The crystal planet was now releasing targeted tendrils of light, each one reaching for another of Rostova's ships. She was a master tactician, her crews disciplined and brave, but they were fighting a concept, not an enemy. They dodged and weaved, their point defense cannons firing uselessly against the encroaching waves of art. Another ship, a frigate, was caught, its communication mast twisted into a delicate, crystalline flower. Its crew, like the souls on Viridia, were now part of the sculpture. Thorn. How much longer? Rostova's voice was strained. We can't hold them off for more than a few minutes. Elias felt the ship thrumming around him, a deep, resonant vibration that was not sound, but a shivering in the fabric of space-time. He felt a connection forming, a link between his own mind and the cold, godlike logic of the ship. The echoes turned their mirrored faces toward him in perfect unison. A torrent of data flooded his consciousness, not as numbers or words, but as a feeling, a sensation. He felt the vast, ancient timeline of the lumen, their birth in a universe of pure light, their evolution into beings of sentient energy, their first forays into shaping reality, their growing belief that all existence was merely a canvas for their divine will. He felt their serene, passionless intellect, their utter inability to comprehend suffering as anything more than a discordant note in a symphony. He felt their presence on Viridia, the moment of correction, not as an act of violence, but as an act of creation, as holy and blameless in their minds as an artist stretching a new canvas. To erase them, he had to understand them. He had to hold the entirety of their existence in his mind, and he had to hate it enough to sign its death warrant. He saw his daughter's face, her laughing eyes, her hand holding the glowing sylvan bloom. He saw her again, a perfect, lifeless statue of crystal, her joy frozen for eternity. The cold calm in his heart solidified into a singularity of purpose. "Target locked," Elias Thorne said, his voice the only sound on the silent bridge. "Fire." The echoes turned as one. The torpedo bay doors did not open. The hull of the Unmaker simply ceased to exist in a small, circular section. The chrono torpedo, a sphere of perfect, spinning blackness, detached itself from its mooring and floated out into the void. It did not ignite an engine. It did not accelerate. It simply moved. A tiny, silent piece of absolute nothingness drifting serenely toward the brilliant, pulsating heart of the prism. It was the ultimate flaw, The final discordant note sent to silence the symphony forever. The journey of the chrono torpedo was a silent, unholy pilgrimage. It did not streak across the void. It drifted, a mote of pure entropy in a sea of divine creation. The Lumen's crystal war planet, still in the process of elegantly correcting another of Rostova's cruisers, seemed to pause. The melodic voice on the comms fell silent. For the first time, the artist noticed a flaw that was not merely dissonant, but antithetical to its very existence. A tendril of the pearlescent, transformative light detached from its target and lashed out at the approaching sphere. The moment the light touched the torpedo, it was not absorbed or deflected. It was undone. The light did not vanish. It had never been cast. For a fraction of a second, the crew of the targeted cruiser saw the crystalline lattice that had begun to form over their view screen flicker and disappear, a ghost of a memory of a fate they had not yet suffered. The torpedo continued its placid, unhurried advance. Panic, an emotion the Lumen had likely not experienced in eons, rippled through the prism. It was not a chaotic, human panic, but a cold, logical cascade of failure. Stars in their perfect orbits flickered. The sculpted nebulae wavered, their colors momentarily losing their vibrancy. The central white heart began to pulse faster, erratically. The entire construct, their masterpiece of 1 billion years, was reacting to this tiny, encroaching sphere of nothingness like a living body sensing a cancer. On the bridge of the Unmaker, Elias felt the ship's connection to his mind deepen. He was no longer just its commander, he was its anchor. The ship was a weapon of paradox, and it needed a conscious, linear mind to ground its actions in the flow of cause and effect. He felt the strain of it now, a splitting headache that felt like his own memories were being torn apart and stitched back together. He saw flickering, impossible images Mars as a lush, green world, Earth orbited by 2 moons, his own reflection with eyes the color of stars. The ship was whispering alternatives to him, showing him the infinite, branching paths of what could be, tempting him with realities where Viridia still bloomed and his family was still alive. It was the weapon's final failsafe to use it. The commander had to possess a will strong enough to reject paradise. He clenched his fists, the image of his daughter's crystal form, his shield against the temporal storm in his mind. Hold! He gritted out, the word a command to the ship and to himself. Hold the line. Rostova's voice, a solid, grounding presence, cut through his psychic turmoil. Thorn. What's happening? My ships are reporting. Echoes. Sensor ghosts of vessels that were destroyed moments ago. The stalwart is flickering in and out of existence. Causal blowback. Elias managed, his teeth chattering. The torpedo isn't just erasing the target, it's erasing its effects. The timeline is fighting back. The chrono torpedo reached the pulsating white heart of the prism. There was no explosion, no flash of light, no cataclysmic shockwave. There was only an instantaneous, silent act of cosmic editing. The white heart vanished. It was not destroyed. It had never been. The effect cascaded outwards with the speed of thought. The captured stars, their gravitational anchor gone, were suddenly just stars again. They flared, their orbits decaying instantly, and began to drift aimlessly back into the black. The sculpted nebulae dissolved into chaotic, meaningless clouds of gas and dust. The crystalline planets, their sentience, their very form, now a paradox, began to shatter. Great, silent cracks spiderwebbed across their faceted surfaces. One by one, they broke apart, not in violent explosions, but by simply crumbling into glittering fields of inert, cosmic dust. The prism, the lumen's billion-year masterpiece, was undone in less than a second. It had never been built. Its artists had never existed. The lumen voice did not scream. It did not cry out. It simply faded, its final melodic hum dissolving into a single, quizzical note of static. A question mark left hanging in a universe that no longer remembered the questioner. The corrected warships, the Stalwart and the others, blinked back into their original forms. Their hulls were scarred and pitted, their crews disoriented, reporting a sudden, inexplicable gap in their memories. They remembered the approach of the crystal planet. And then, nothing. They were simply there, damaged but whole, floating in a now empty sector of space. The lumen were gone, not dead, gone, erased from the tapestry of time as if their thread had been carefully, meticulously, and utterly unpicked on the bridge of the Unmaker. The psychic pressure on Elias snapped. He fell to his knees, gasping, the phantom images fading from his mind. The headache remained, a dulled, throbbing reminder of the sin he had just committed. The echoes stood motionless, their task complete. The ship was silent, waiting for its next command. Did we win? The question came from Rostova's second-in-command, his voice shaking with awe and terror. Rostova stood on her bridge, staring at the empty void where a stellar masterpiece had just been. Win, she repeated, her voice hollow. There are no words for what we just did, her calm chimed. It was Elias. General, he said, his voice strained but steady. It's done. But we are not safe. The paradox is not stable. The universe, it knows what we did. It will try to correct the correction. As he spoke, a new phenomenon began to manifest. Where the heart of the prism had been, the void began to shimmer, to warp. A ripple, like a heat haze, was spreading outwards, not a wave of energy, but a wave of inconsistency. It was a scar in space-time, the wound left by the excision of an entire species from history. Rostova's sensor officer shouted, General, I'm detecting. I don't know what I'm detecting. It's a chronometric anomaly. It's growing. It's not just spreading. It's rewriting. The anomaly swept over one of the nearby drifting stars. The star did not explode. It aged. In the space of a heartbeat, they watched it swell into a red giant, collapse into a white dwarf, and then fade into a cold, black cinder. The wave of temporal chaos continued outwards, a storm of uncontrolled causality. It washed over one of the shattered crystal planets. The glittering dust did not vanish. It reversed, pulling itself back together into a perfect sphere for a split second before aging into a barren, pockmarked rock. Its billion-year life cycle lived out in a flash. This is the price, Elias whispered, watching the cosmic horror unfold. The universe is trying to fill the hole we made. It's patching the timeline with random, chaotic outcomes. He knew what would happen if that wave reached them. It wouldn't kill them. It would rewrite them. They might be aged to dust, or de-aged into primordial atoms. The Iron Resolve might be transformed into a colony ship from a forgotten century, its crew suddenly speaking a dead language. He himself might be remade into a man who had never had a family, a man for whom the name Viridia meant nothing. Their victory would be erased by an even greater act of erasure. Rostova, Elias commanded, forcing himself to his feet. Get your fleet out of here. Now, jump to the Cinderfall Nebula. Do not return to the core worlds. They will hunt you, go dark, disappear, become a myth. What about you? She demanded, her voice cutting through the rising panic on her bridge. Where will you go? Elias looked out at the approaching wave of temporal chaos, a tsunami of uncreation. The Unmaker could outrun it with its temporal drive, but the ship was a weapon too terrible to exist. Its purpose was served, but the wound it had created remained. Leaving it open would poison the entire galaxy. The paradox must be sealed, he said, his voice imbued with the cold, absolute certainty of a man who has seen the end of his path. The wound must be closed from the inside. He understood now. The ship wasn't just a weapon, it was also the suture. It could excise, but it could also isolate. Goodbye, General, Elias said. Live well, and tell them the Peacemaker sent his regards. He cut the connection before she could reply. He turned to the silent, waiting echoes. Seal the anomaly, he commanded. Plot a course for its epicenter. Prepare to engage the paradox engine. One of the echoes turned its mirrored face to him. A single, final query flashed in the air. Directive requires a living, conscious anchor for sustained temporal isolation. Survival probability 0. Elias looked down at his hand. He could almost feel the phantom warmth of his daughter's fingers wrapped around his. He had started this journey to avenge her. He would end it to protect the universe from the very weapon he had unleashed. I am the anchor, Elias Thorne said, a strange, sad peace settling over him. Take us in. The Unmaker turned, its skeletal frame gliding silently, not away from the storm, but directly into its heart. The plunge into the heart of the anomaly was not a journey through space, but a fall through the fractured library of all that ever was and all that could have been. As the Unmaker crossed the event horizon of the causal storm, the silent, ordered bridge dissolved into a maelstrom of sensory and psychic chaos. Elias was no longer a man in a ship. He was a consciousness adrift in a symphony of broken time. He saw the birth of Earth's sun, not as a historical event, but as a present, searing reality. He felt the cold silence of the galaxy's final heat death. He lived 1,000 lives in 1,000 branching timelines, a farmer on a world that never discovered spaceflight, a soldier dying in the First Terran War, an artist painting nebulae with light, a lumen, serene and eternal, adding a final, perfect touch to a crystalline moon. The ship, a construct of paradox, was attempting to find a stable reality, and it was using his mind as the template. It offered him an endless buffet of alternate existences, searching for one he would accept, one where the wound in the universe could be ignored. Then, the chaos coalesced, the storm subsided, and he was standing, not on the bridge, but on the soft, green grass of Viridia. The air was warm, filled with the gentle, harmonic hum of the sylvan groves. The light was perfect. Lena was there, walking towards him from their small, white home, her face etched with concern, not terror. Elias, you were gone for so long, she said, her voice the most real thing he had ever heard. You look so tired. From behind her, a small figure came running, her laughter a cascade of silver bells. Maya. She was 7 years old, her face bright with an unblemished joy. She threw her arms around his legs. "Daddy, you're back. You missed the light song." He felt the warmth of her small body, the familiar scent of her hair. It was real. Every sensor, every instinct, every shattered piece of his heart screamed that it was real. This was the universe's final, most cruel and tempting offer, a reality where the horror had never happened. A perfectly patched timeline. He could stay. He could accept this correction. All he had to do was let go. The echoes stood silently behind him, their mirrored faces reflecting this perfect, impossible scene. The Unmaker was waiting for his decision. He looked down at Maya's face, her eyes wide and trusting. He looked at Lena, her hand outstretched to him, and he saw the flaw. It was too perfect. There was no memory of loss in their eyes, no shadow of the sacrifice he had made. This wasn't his family. It was a beautiful, hollow echo, a ghost wearing the faces of those he loved. He had not burned a species from existence to be rewarded with a pleasant lie. His grief was real. It was the last true thing he owned, the final testament to the love he had lost. It was the source of his strength, the cold, hard core of the man he had become. He knelt, his hand hovering just an inch from his daughter's cheek, not daring to touch the phantom. "I love you," he whispered, the words of final farewell to the man he used to be. Then he stood, turned his back on paradise, and faced the silent, waiting echoes. "This is not my reality," he said, his voice ringing with the finality of a death sentence and the conviction of a saint. "My grief is real. It is all I have left of them, and you will not take it from me." The illusion shattered. Viridia dissolved into screaming fractals of light and color. He was back on the bridge, the causal storm raging outside, more furious than ever for his rejection. He had made his choice. He would not be a refugee in a false timeline. He would be the guardian of the true one, however broken it was. "Engage the paradox engine," he commanded, his voice calm, resolute. "Isolate this timeline. I am the anchor." The echoes moved as one. They raised their arms, and the ship around them began to dematerialize, its dark matter conduits and temporal sinks turning inwards. The Unmaker was not just a ship, it was a cage, and it was now turning itself inside out to form the bars. Elias felt an unbearable pressure, not on his body, but on his soul, on his very existence. He was being stretched across the wound, his consciousness becoming the thread that would stitch the torn edges of space-time back together. The last thing he saw on the view screen was not the storm, but the distant, peaceful star field of the normal universe. He saw Rostova's fleet, small and defiant, making its escape into the dark. Then the view dissolved. His body ceased to be. His memories became a fixed, unchanging constellation. He was no longer Elias Thorne. He was a constant, a law of physics, a silent, eternal watchman holding the floodgates of chaos closed. From the bridge of the Iron Resolve, General Rostova watched the anomaly collapse. The roiling, rewriting storm of space-time folded in on itself, shrinking with impossible speed until it was a single, infinitely dense point. And then it was gone. In its place, where the heart of a cosmic terror had once pulsed, there was only a scar. It was a faint, almost imperceptible line in the fabric of space, a seam in the star field that shimmered with a faint, multi-hued light, as if the void itself had been wounded and healed imperfectly. The universe was quiet. The sensor ghosts were gone. The timeline was stable. The wound was closed. Rostova stood in silence for a long time, her face a mask of iron and sorrow. She had lost good soldiers, but Elias Thorne had lost his humanity to save everyone else's. He had become a ghost to keep the monsters at bay. 50 years passed. The Terran Confederacy never saw the Iron Resolve or the Third Fleet again. They became a legend, the Unremembered Fleet, a ghost squadron said to patrol the outer darkness. The official story was that Director Thorne and General Rostova had gone rogue, stolen a fleet, and vanished into uncharted space, consumed by their own madness. The truth was buried, but the Confederacy changed, humbled by the Viridian Report, which was classified but whose terrifying implications leaked into the highest echelons of power. They became more cautious, more respectful of the great, silent powers in the dark. The era of arrogant expansion was over. On the frontier, a new myth took hold among spacers and deep-range pilots. They spoke of the Silent Heart, a sector in the stellar abyss that all navigational charts warned away from. They said if you flew too close, your ship's chronometer would spin wildly, and you'd hear whispers on the comms, a woman's gentle concern, a child's happy laughter. They called it Thorne's Anomaly. It was said to be the place where a man had made a deal with the void, sacrificing his soul to become a lighthouse keeper for reality itself. It was a ghost story told in hushed tones in dimly lit cantinas, a warning to stay away from the places where the laws of the universe were thin. A new generation of pilots, flying for a new, more careful Confederacy, sometimes saw it from a safe distance, the faint, beautiful scar on the night sky. They didn't know the full story. They didn't know about the Lumen, or the Unmaker, or the Peacemaker who had unleashed a temporal apocalypse. But they knew the scar was a border. On one side was the known, ordered galaxy. On the other was a sealed and silent madness. And they knew, with a certainty that was woven into the fabric of their culture, that something was there, on that border, keeping watch. They did not know that the faint, shimmering light of the anomaly was powered by the unending gravity of a love that refused to be forgotten, and held stable by the unbreakable will of a man who had lost everything, and in doing so, had saved it all.